Hey, eighth grade, how you doing? It's been a long time since I was in the movie theater, so I thought maybe I'd come at you live like I was in the movies. Some people I could have had a future in it, but I doubt it. Anyway, what we are going to talk about today, my friends, are going to be the early British colonies and how the British began to colonize what you and I know as North America. Okay. And with that being said, we're going to kind of get a jump on things and kind of start talking about what we talked about the other day. Some decisions get made and things kind of do their best when they're trying, when they're trying to make it through, but they don't really know what to do. And we're going to talk about some causes and effects from that on this. We will also be doing an Ed puzzle with this, so please be ready for questions throughout this awesome possum video. All right, with that being said, I'm going to share with you what we're going to be discussing today. And today is British colonies. So let's, without further ado, get started. When we look at the British colonies, a lot of people are asked what the first British colony was. And a lot of people make mistakes with some of this. They will say, oh, it's, they'll say it's Jamestown, or maybe they'll say it's Massachusetts Bay Colony or Plymouth Colony. And that's not that is not accurate. If I could speak correctly, I'd be all right. So what we're really talking about, what we're really asking for is that we actually have what is considered a lost colony. And that lost colony is known as Roanoke. It was off of the coast of North Carolina in 1585. A guy by the name of Sir Walter Raleigh came in, gathered up about 100 men, and was looking for ways for the British to kind of catch up. Because at this point, the Spanish had colonies everywhere. The French started having colonies everywhere. The Dutch had colonies everywhere. The Portuguese had colonies everywhere. And Britain was kind of the last group of people to kind of really get into colonization. We talk about colonization in sixth grade, so I'm not going to go into it deep over there. But Britain decides to get into this, and Sir Walter Raleigh convinces the British government to allow him to come out and try and colonize something in North America. Well, he goes out there in 1585, and there's a really difficult winter there, and the colonists end up returning to New England, but with every intention to go back. There's a second group of settlers, and this time they came with families, and they come in, and they come back in 1587. And this is one of what they call history's mysteries. And what that means is a group of Roanoke colonists deserted the island. They disappeared. Walter Raleigh wrote in his journal he didn't want to leave, but he needed to go back to England, get more supplies. They knew a rough winter was coming again. I don't know. It's an interesting side note. If maybe they wanted him to leave, I don't know if he was that popular of a guy. But when he went back, the problem is at that time Great Britain entered a war with Spain, and during that war, Mr. Raleigh was kind of stuck back in England, and so he's back there for a couple years. And when he makes it back, the whole colony's gone. The buildings are gone. There's nothing buried. There's no sign of destruction. There's anything. The only thing left there was a wooden post with a word that serves. They wrote the word Croatoan. The word Croatoan was the neighboring tribe. They lived on an island just north of Roanoke. They lived out there on the Great Barrier Islands of North Carolina. And so Mr. Raleigh went out there. He and his ships went sailing around that island. They never found anybody. And so, like I said, it became a real mysterious factoid. Fun fact, though, I'm gonna put out a article because there was news actually this week that the lost colony of Roanoke's mystery has been solved. And so one of those things I'm going to ask you is what do you think might have happened to Roanoke? Because as you know, it's North Carolina. It could have been a hurricane. There could have been a tsunami. There could have been them joining the Croatoan people. There could have been maybe they tried to build a ship and try to go back to England on their own. There's a lot of possibilities there. And so I'm interested in to see what your perspective is and what your thoughts are. Kind of guess what you think. And I'm going to put that up on the Ed Puzzle here, and you can tell me what your theory would be. All right. So after Roanoke fails, though, it freaks out a lot of people because nobody knows where these people went. And so it's going to be a little while before people want to go back. And so Jamestown will be the first, and this is an important point, the first permanent colony. And this isn't going to happen until 1607. Remember, that was 1687. So you've got a solid 20 years go by before people are even going, oh yeah, colonies sound good. Now, there were wars with Spain. There was, fighting with the Dutch. A lot of those other things also had an impact on why people don't come back out. But frankly, a 20-year gap's a big gap. And so the Virginia Company sets out again to create a British presence in North America to kind of get Britain on this colonization board. The important thing about Jamestown, it is the first permanent English colony in the Americas. That's what I want you to really remember about Jamestown. Most people, though, who come here arrive unprepared. A lot of them were young men. This is, they started jumping out of the boats. There are reports and journals of people literally jumping out of longboats and canoes from the ship, digging on the beaches, digging around Jamestown, looking for gold and silver. They'd heard stories from Spain about cities of gold, and they brought back a bunch of gold from the Aztec people, and they brought back a bunch of silver from the Inca people. So a lot of these people are trying to just get rich quick. And so they're looking for, gold or silver or some type of valuable mineral. And so there's literally stories of these guys going around digging holes all over the forest, digging holes in the swamp. And we know this, but they didn't. It's a swamp. There's not a lot of gold there. So most of the people die because they were not prepared. They came with clothes and pickaxes and shovels, but they didn't bring anything to construct proper shelters. The winter was colder than they anticipated. They didn't bring enough food. They didn't know how to farm the food, especially in a swampland where you have a lot of brackish water, that's salty type water. And so they end up getting local help from what is called the Powhatan tribe. And the Powhatans help them survive that first year. A year later, reinforcements come. A guy by the name of Captain John Smith arrives, and he is sent there. He's a military man. He had fought around South Africa and India. He'd been traveled all over the world for the British Army. And so the British government sends him here to kind of help get Jamestown operating. And so he builds defensive walls. He builds latrines. He shows them how to collect and purify water, store things. He's not very popular with the local guys. A lot of them are from the nobility and aristocratic classes. They think he's kind of some young upstart. He's a commoner. They don't treat him very well. They actually try to arrest him a couple times because they don't think he's respectful enough to them, even though these guys don't know how to camp or survive, and John Smith's trying to show them. Overall, though, Captain John Smith's important because without John Smith, he is credited with helping this colony survive. And frankly, if Jamestown doesn't survive, a lot of people think that the British probably would have gotten out of colonizing, and that would change a lot of things for you and I. We might be speaking Spanish. We might be speaking French. Who knows? Maybe we have a Native American language we're learning. But the colony was also viewed, even though it was surviving, the problem was the London Company, or what they would call the Virginia Company, starts to declare that Virginia is not profitable. Jamestown is not profitable. There's no gold. There's no silver. What are we doing? They don't know how to farm the land, so what do we do? When you look at where Jamestown's located, and you can see my little arrow here, it's kind of located on the James River here, and they had kind of started this colony smack dab in the middle of a very large Native American nation. This is known as the Powhatan Confederacy, and the Powhatans controlled everything you see here in purple. These are, I put in some of the new towns today, but then all of these little areas here, these are Indian settlements. So these are cities that were around Jamestown, and Jamestown begins to do things such as trade and try to make good with them and try to start relationships, but it's very tense because the colonists are still, even though they're starting to look at trading and do stuff with these guys, they're still looking for gold and silver. Again, they haven't been there that long. They've only been in it for a year. They're trying to learn some other stuff. the person that really changes Jamestown and really makes it a permanent colony. John Smith helps it survive. John Rolfe is going to find the key to make Jamestown profitable. He comes to Jamestown seeking a way to make Jamestown profitable for the Virginia and London Company, because otherwise they're going to pull up stakes and it's just going to go, it's going to go bankrupt. It's going to go away. What John Rolfe does is he helps and learns about a new plant. He brought with him the tobacco plant. So yeah, they again start growing a lot of tobacco. Now they did not know it could cause, cancers and all sorts of stuff. But back then, tobacco farming and tobacco smoking was seen as a real ritzy thing. So the aristocrats and people around Europe liked cigarettes and liked pipes and liked all that. So guess what he's able to do? He's able to grow tobacco in this area. London Company, to try and stimulate more settlement, offers land to attract more settlers. More people come out here to try and get land and farm it. The idea is they'll grow tobacco for London Company. The company can make money, and these folks get the land. John Rolfe ends up making a peace treaty with Chief Powhatan. We call these folks the Powhatan people because their leader's name was Powhatan, and he had a daughter. Her name was Pocahontas. John Rolfe married Pocahontas to create a peace treaty with the Powhatan Confederacy, the Powhatan tribe. And this is really, I get upset with the Disney company, but yeah, John Smith and Pocahontas, yeah, not a romantic thing. They didn't sing at the Blue Corn Moon. John Rolfe married Pocahontas, and it was really an agreement. And there's a lot of stuff goes behind that because it's going to be related to what we talk about next, but it's really what brings peace to the region because the people of Jamestown and the London Company are going to be fighting the Powhatan off and on over control of land and over control of farming areas and stuff. The Virginia Company allowed for a representative government, and this means if you started to develop various towns, oh snap, that went backwards, my bad, but various towns, you could elect a town where you elected what was called a burgess. All right, and they would have these called House of Burgesses. But a burgess was a representative elected to an assembly. And they made local laws, like, hey, we need a sidewalk, or hey, we need a park, or we need to build city walls, or we need to do something. But the House of Burgesses meets for the very first time, July 30th, 1619. And that is one of the first democratic meetings that we have with the British influence for our colonies. This is one of our first democratic meetings. And so this is kind of democracy in action. And like I said, they made local laws. The House of Burgesses, like I said, gets formed in 1619. 1619 is a big year, though. It's also the first year that women come to Jamestown. They were there to help form families and help the population increase and meet up with the farmers and stuff. From 1607 to 1619, it was just young men and other people there seeking their fortune, whether it was looking for gold or silver or later, starting tobacco farms. 1619 is also the first year where African Americans or Africans are sent to Jamestown. According to the ledgers, there's 20 Africans come to Jamestown, and they were sold to Virginia planters to work in the tobacco fields. So this is the first example of slavery that takes place as well. There were also other people that came to the colonies as indentured servants, not as slaves. But in the years that follows, you start to see Africans become enslaved more and more, and they're sold as slaves upon arrival. But interesting to note, slavery does not officially become legal until the 1660s. And we will get into this when we start talking about colonial governments and colonial laws and kind of how that's all shaping up under the British system. Now, we've talked a little bit about how when people find themselves in the middle of major historical events, they don't necessarily always know what to do. We know what happens because we show up and we read the book or we look at the events and go, why didn't they do this or why didn't they do that? Well, like I said, they're growing a lot of tobacco, and yeah, you can't eat tobacco. It's not edible. It's not good for you. So in 1622, there had been trade deals for food with the local Powhatan people, and some of the Jamestown colonists end up getting in a fight and an argument over Powhatan chief over food stores, and they're actually caught sneaking in and trying to steal food in the middle of the night. And this actually starts what is known as the Anglo-Powhatan War. This war lasts for 20 years. You can look it up. It's known as the Indian Massacre of 1622. The British called it the Jamestown Massacre of 1622. But it starts on a Friday. It starts March 22nd, 1622, and it starts over food because the colonists were growing a lot more tobacco than food. And that was a problem because they didn't have enough food to eat. So what ends up happening is after the Powhatan chief got killed, well, the Powhatan counterattack. And the Native Americans, when they counterattack, they killed over 347 English settlers. It almost wipes out all of Jamestown. It's really dangerous. It's really harsh. And the real problem is John Rolfe got killed. And what that meant was, you got to remember, John Rolfe had been married to Pocahontas. If they're not married, there's no peace treaty. So there was no way to really work this out. The London Company and Virginia Company are constantly asked by the British government, can you get it under control? Can you get it under control? And they keep saying it's under control, but clearly it's not. The big effect of the Anglo-Powhatan War is that the British government steps in and takes the colony over. All right. It's no longer a private venture. It is now the government stepping in, the King of England, the Parliament of England, and they're going to make basically they're going to make Virginia what they call a royal colony. We'll talk about the types of colonies here in a little bit. This is an effect. Now remember, though, I'm talking about causes and effects, right? The big effect of the British government takeover is that they brought in new social systems in the colony. Now remember, from 1619 to 1639, it's a private company. They make whatever rules they want. They allow the House of Burgesses to make their own rules. But when the British government takes over, it brings a whole new social system. It's called the headright system. And the headright system was a system that gave a huge amount of land to colonists, whoever brought servants that could farm tobaccos and crops. So you got 50 acres per servant. So if you had an indentured servant or they imported enslaved people, you got 50 acres for every person you got to bring with you that would work that tobaccoed land. Because now the British government was going to go in and tax the tobacco. That was they were going to make the money for paying for their armies and paying for taking over the government or taking over the colony. Indentured servants are going to be really, really popular to use because, frankly, they're cheaper. Most colonists come to Virginia as indentured servant. Over 75% of people who come to Virginia will come as indentured servants. And the contract of an indentured servant was this. The owner of the tobacco farm or tobacco plantation would pay for you to come, typically from Britain, and you would work for them anywhere between 4 to 7 years, and you would work off that debt. Now, that's a lot of debt because not only are they paying for you to come over the ocean, but they're also going to provide you housing. They're also going to provide you food and all of those other things. So it's going to take a while. So when you say, why is it 4 to 7 years? This is why. You're paying off all sorts of various debts, and you can incur new debts too. So indentured servitude is kind of a rough deal. People work, though, on the plantations and farms. And again, the idea was to survive because a lot of these folks will die working in the field because of, new diseases, malnutrition, just the weather, adapting to the weather, all that stuff. It's more common than slavery, though, at this time because it was cheaper. Slaves were seen as very expensive, and they thought, well, I can get people for their prime years, and after 4 to 7 years, they can go on and do something else. In the 1600s, remember, slavery gets established in Virginia, but it's not super popular. But we'll talk to you. This is going to be one of those things that this is a major effect of British takeover, but it's also going to become a cause, okay? So this leads to Bacon's Rebellion. This does not mean you're having a bad breakfast, okay? Nathaniel Bacon was a person that was going to lead a rebellion based on taxes. A lot of indentured servants were getting taxed on the income or what the British government said was income because other people paid for their trip and their food and their housing. Well, if they're not getting paid and they're in a 4 to 7 year contract, how do you pay the British government? So this starts because of taxes, which should sound familiar because, frankly, the American Revolution starts because of taxes. This starts in 1676, which is exactly 100 years before the American Revolution. Kind of a fun fact. So, maybe that'll win you some nachos. The rebellion is very successful until Bacon dies. Literally, remember, you got to remember, this is all swampland. It's around Virginia. It's around Jamestown. He gets a mosquito. A mosquito bite changes history. Bacon dies of malaria. And what happens is all of these folks that were rebelling, when their leader dies, kind of disperse. What you need to remember, though, is the vast majority of the people that fought for this were indentured servants. Well, since they had come over, What they did is they kind of played dumb. Hey, did you fight with Nathaniel Bacon? Did you fight the British government? Well, no, we were over here. We were being good indentured servants. We were growing tobacco. We were doing this. So they tried to blend back in with society because people didn't want to get caught. Because of this, people start to get scared of indentured servitude. After the rebellion, plantation owners began to depend on slaves more because slaves were controlled and had no rights, whereas indentured servants, even though they were indentured for work for 4 to 7 years, there were still rights. And slavery becomes more popular because enslaved people under the British government did not have rights. That's a big effect. That's a big concern. It's a very unfortunate way to end the notes, but that's what I want you to look at. I want you to look at the cause and the effects. The cause and the effects. We will talk about this during the Zoom today. Don't forget, tomorrow is your quiz. You should have turned in all of your vocabulary terms tonight. This is an ed puzzle. This is an assignment. So make sure you answer it and then mark, turn in, or mark as done on your work when you go back to the assignment. All right. Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate your attention and time. I will see you tomorrow.